Hello. Welcome everyone to this mini global research platform track. And beside me is actually Joe Mambretti, this was his brainchild. He started the global research platform way back in 2019, and I thought it was amazing, and we need to get it out to this Asia region. And it's amazing. Joe, you there?
I am here.
Okay. We have lined up a very interesting program for you. Maxine, Joe, and myself have worked through, and we really have to thank all the speakers that some of them are staying up late tonight to hear to give the talk. Now, without further ado, let me pass the mic over to Joe. Joe, all the way to you, and give an overview of GRP.
Okay, so I'll just go ahead and start my presentation. Give me a second to queue it up. Can you all see that? I don't hear anything, but I'm assuming you can all see it.
Yes, Joe, we can see it.
Okay, thanks. Just a confirmation. All right, so what is the Global Research Platform? Well, basically, it's a recognition that science is global, and many of the sciences are data intensive. Many sciences are creating instrumentation that generates massive amounts of data, which needs to have different kinds of treatment across the globe. There are many sites that collect data and other sites that compute data, store data, do the analytics for the data. And these science sites need to be interconnected. So it's a way of treating in a special way the science data versus the enterprise data or the commodity data or any other kind of data. So it's a distributed, software-defined, multi-domain computational science environment. And it's based on an architecture that actually grew up from the Department of Energy's Energy Science Network. They have an architecture called the Science DMZ, and essentially this is a global science DMZ. But first of all, I'd like to thank Francis Lee and Yves Popé and Maxine Brown and all of the local organizers who contributed and helped us with the orchestration, including Mani. So science is global, so we need infrastructure that's global. And this GRP is an international collaborative partnership with people worldwide, creating a software-defined, globally distributed, multi-domain computational science environment that can be customized individually to different sciences. The concepts, architectures, experiments, instruments, methods, data, and results are openly shared among the different communities. And this is a key motivation for the efforts here. Often, large-scale science projects develop science infrastructure, architecture, services, technologies, but don't share among the different sciences. We're trying to impart, develop channels for communication so that if people discover good techniques, they can be shared with other sciences. Open information sharing is a cornerstone of the science process. And so again, that's a key motivation for the effort overall and certainly for this forum. The GRP facilitates specifically high performance data gathering, analytics, and transport on 100 gig to terabit, increasingly terabit per second networks. And then we have a website, which I'm pointing to here, so further information is available. These are some of the sciences that we are supporting. And notice the Xeon project in the middle there. Behind me is the Xeon dark matter detector, one of the projects that we support to this. And here are some samples of instrumentation that are coming along that are generating massive amounts of data that we want to move among different science communities, different science resource sites. And here's a statement from the National Science Foundation from the US. Across the full range of the National Science Foundation supported fields, increasingly sophisticated instrumentation and extended computational resources are opening new windows in a phenomenon from the universe to the human brain, largest scale to the smallest across all domains. And that's another important aspect of the work in which we engage. It's multi-domain, not just science domains, the cross-fertilization of interdisciplinary research, but transporting data across multiple policy and cyber infrastructure domains. That's something somewhat unique to us. And this is a revolution that's transforming research, practice, and education in science and engineering and advancing society. So the vision of the near future shows an urgent need for comprehensive, scalable cyber infrastructure, bridging diverse communities and bringing high performance computing, data, software facilities. So one of the activities is defining requirements from the different science communities, and then developing the architecture, services, technologies, techniques to respond, so-called cyber infrastructure blueprints. And also adding to the mix is addressing the Cambrian explosion of both the requirements and the innovation. So there's a lot of new techniques coming from commercial sources, academic sources, governments, and it's moving very fast. So everybody knows that IT accelerates, even given supply chain problems. One big macro trend is what you've heard of as software eating the world. Software defined everything. It's a revolution that's enabled by ever higher levels of abstraction. So we're transitioning to a software defined world, which leads inevitably to software defined science. And this allows for more flexibility, more control over the resources, more customization, more fluidity in how you're building. So you don't have to compromise services, applications to the infrastructure. You can customize the infrastructure to the applications. So there's multiple software building blocks that are being developed, and I'm going to talk about some of those and some of the major themes, technology themes being addressed by the GRP initiative. Science domains create cyber infrastructure ecosystems, some distributed worldwide, some devoted to domains, some shared among domains. And as I said earlier, there's minimal opportunities for information sharing. And this is one of the motivation, again, behind the projects. Opportunities for collaborations are especially useful for interdisciplinary research. Now, I'm going to give just one example, the high energy physics LHC ecosystem. People are probably familiar with this project. There's a tier 0 instrument at CERN across the mainly Switzerland, but also a bit in France, generating large amounts of data, which are distributed on dedicated optical channels to computational sites around the world. It's so-called tier 1 sites. A very successful model, and other large-scale sciences, including the Square Kilometre Array, LSST, to some degree are using that kind of a model. But this is being supplemented by other models, such as for the Large Hadron Collider, the Large Hadron Collider open network environment, which you see here. Is a chart developed by Bill Johnson. this is turned out to be a very successful, highly useful distributed fabric for the tier 2 centers, the tier 3 centers, and the integration of tier 2 and tier 3 with tier 1. It's been so useful, it can be used for demonstrations and experiments. For example, for the Supercomputing conference in the US in November, part of it was carved out to support the NOTED project, which is being led by CERN, which is network optimized for the transport of experimental data, to have AI models doing just-in-time provisioning and optimization for channels. So because of the fluidity, the segmentation possibilities of this fabric, it turns out to be very successful. In addition, a number of science projects that are not LHC specific, but rather are particle physics. They're listed here: Bell 2 experiment, Pierre Auger Observatory, LIGO, NOVA, GÉANT, as I mentioned earlier, and DUNE and others, have been using very successfully the LHC1, and other science communities have asked to join the LHC1, such as bioinformatics, geophysical sciences, atmospherics, but they can't because everybody can't fit in the same boat. So there's another motivation for creating something more generalized for other sciences, but based on these existing successful models. Instrumentation, compute, analytics, storage resources are highly distributed among multiple domains. As I said, that's a key part of what we do, that is, as a community, we deal with multiple domains, interconnected with high-performance networks, where the performance isn't just the capacity, such as 100 gig, but also the utilization effectively end-to-end. Key issues are orchestration, discovering resources, claiming them, integrating them, releasing them, and increasingly, as I said earlier, software-defined infrastructure are shaping these issues. So that's another key theme. Another theme is the wide area transport. It's always been a major challenge, especially over long distances, thousands of miles, 10,000 miles. We really like Singapore because it allows us to do trials of high performance protocols and transports. I mentioned here at the bottom, Supercomputing Asia sponsors what's called the Data Mover Challenge. They gather a collaborative community around the world to do a test bed to try new techniques. And the results of that were announced yesterday. It's a great test bed, and all of the participants expressed gratitude for having that to try out their different techniques. It advances the state of the art. So in part, these issues are generated by the instrumentation generating large data, but also there's instrumentation that generates less amounts of data, but need these kinds of infrastructures. The issue is often described reductively by only focusing on network capacity, but actually, even though that's very important, it's the least of it. Again, the most important part is what happens at the edge. For example, with data transfer nodes, with just-in-time provisioning using AI and other techniques. So another theme being explored by the GRP community is opportunities for data transport by directly detecting and analyzing all data flows and their characteristics. I have a footnote here saying arguments are being advanced for individual packet marking and analysis. It's kind of a debate. Do you do packet marking individually? Some people are claiming that's too much information. Maybe it's best to focus on flows. Others would like to do segment routing. But we're trying out these different things. We're trying out different approaches, and that's the nice thing about having such distributed infrastructure to try these various techniques. All of them are enabling high fidelity views of all flows in real time and allowing for dynamic traffic engineering. And it's possible with these kinds of approaches, including wrapping in techniques such as AI, machine learning, deep learning, which, although still emerging, are becoming important tools. Another important tool is simply such things as P4 data plane programming, and we're going to hear about that in this session. Another theme is this macro theme of software-defined everything, which allows for a deep network programmability, especially programming the data plane. I mentioned the P4 programming language, which can be used with software-defined networking control protocols such as OpenFlow and others. P4 enables real-time data plane programmability, reconfigurability. It reduces dependency on specific network protocols and separates packet processing functionality from supporting physical hardware. And the physical hardware in many instances are becoming white boxes and commodity chips. Supplementing these techniques and alternative programming languages are emerging, as well as wrapped-in techniques such as in-network compute. Another big theme is dealing with the complexity, scale, and sophistication of next-generation cyber infrastructure. It's so complex it requires automation. You want to take people and manual processing out of the loop. Much of networking still is manual processing, and those processes are inadequate. They can't address the number of parameters that have to be considered to optimize workflows, data streams, especially in real time. So progress is being made on designing and implementing what has been called self-driving networks, intent-driven networks, expressing a goal and not implementation, which is done by the automation techniques. People pointed out we have automated cars, but not yet automated networks. So we need to advance that. And then another theme is, given the challenging requirements of anticipated large-scale science projects, along with accelerated rates of ongoing innovation, international test beds are required for pre-production investigation and prototyping of new technologies and techniques. And some of those themes of global test beds for data-intensive science will be discussed in this session. And more capabilities are required. For example, one thing we're doing in the US is building out 400 gig and 800 gig and terabit test beds to begin planning for the next generation of high capacity networks. This is an example. We work with the SciNet group for supercomputing. The Supercomputing Conference in the US every year to create a nationwide test bed to try out some techniques. This year we did 2 400 gig links between the Starlight facility and the Joint Big Data Test Bed in McLean, Virginia, and then 3 400 gigs going from Starlight to the venue in St. Louis. This is a schematic. And then, of course, I mentioned the very important test bed that gets created for Supercomputing Asia, which allows for the examination of new techniques and protocols. And again, the results of that was just announced yesterday. Another test bed coming up in the US is called Fabric. It's a National Science Foundation sponsored test bed. This shows the current topology, which is anticipated as having a terabit per second backbone from McLean, Virginia to the Starlight facility to the south to the West Coast. A more recent design is actually attempting a loop that will go from the East Coast through Starlight through Salt Lake City to California, and then having a southern route going from California to Dallas to the East Coast. That is being planned as something of an upgrade. Another item that Tom Lehman has mentioned, and he's going to be talking later, is the potential for doing, instead of 10 100 gig as the core backbone, maybe three rather, 400 gig channels. So with that, I'll conclude and thank everybody. And thanks to all the collaborative communities worldwide who are working together to advance the state of the art for data-intensive science.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much for giving us a glimpse of some of the global research that's ongoing among the researchers in Europe, in US, and in Asia. Next I'll call upon Dr. Richard Hodges, Senior Network Advisor to GÉANT Association, and he will talk about one of the big applications or global collaboration, and that's on international networking for the SKA. Richard, the floor is yours.
You're on mute, Richard.
Right, sorry about that. Can you see my screen okay and hear me this time?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for giving me an invitation to talk about the networking for SKA. I will try and cover the information both within the telescopes themselves and globally. As you heard from Sarah Pierce in the opening plenary on SKA, the SKAO, the SKA Observatory, is an intergovernmental organization that's been set up last year, and it includes 16 member countries, and construction of the telescopes, the two telescopes, started in July of last year. So the two telescopes, one is located in Australia on the left-hand side of the screen. The antenna are what we call the folded dipoles, logarithmic dipoles covering the range from 50 to 350 megahertz, and we call it SKA low. They're grouped in stations of 256 antennas, and there is a little picture of one of them there. The white ring shows where the antennas are located in Murchison, and the yellow ring shows where the computing will be carried out in Perth. On the right-hand side of the screen, it shows the SKA mid, which is higher frequencies up to 14 gigahertz. These use dishes. And again, the white ring shows you where the dishes are located in the Karoo, and the compute, the yellow little ring, shows where the compute will be done in Cape Town. The telescopes essentially use three different networks. A data network, shown in red, connecting the antenna to the central processing unit, well, that's actually the correlator, onto the science data processor, and then what I've called SDP here is sending the data to compute centers around the world. More about that later. In order for the antenna to work properly, they all need to be coherent in terms of receiving the signals from the astronomical entities, and for that we need a synchronization and timing network. That's actually quite clever photonics. They're aiming for a picosecond accuracy and 10 nanoseconds over 10 years, which is quite an interesting thing. Telescopes need to be controlled, and so we have called something the non-science data network, which is like a very big distributed campus network for monitoring and control. Looking at the layouts of the telescopes, both of them consist of a core of antenna, which you see in the middle, and 3 spiral arms which radiate out from the core. It's easiest to see on the right-hand side for South Africa, the link that will carry the data from the central processing facility, which is the little red dot in the middle, over to the Science Processing Centre situated in Cape Town. But both telescopes are very similar in the fact that the compute is done remotely. So the problem is that we have to get the data from the dishes. I've taken the dishes as an example here. And what we have found is that we need a long-haul network to link the center to the compute. But it is more straightforward to use 100 gigabit links from each receptor or dish in this case. And given the distances vary, so we can use the different types of pluggable modules. There is, of course, one problem that some of the dishes are located more than 80 kilometers away from the location where we got the optical transport, and we have to extend the optical transport into what we've called the outer shelters in the diagram to the right. Looking at the overall network, we have the links to the dishes on the left, the long haul network, which has to carry 20 terabits. This is actually 20 terabits DC. It's continuous traffic from the dishes while they're observing. This feeds into the correlator, which is the blue boxes. Underneath the blue boxes are 2 boxes that look for pulsar. We have pulsar search, that's looking for new pulsars. We have pulsar timing, which is measuring the timing of many pulsars. And the correlator itself forms beams and also processes the what they call the visibilities. These are what you and I would call the sky maps. In order to get the sky maps, you need to send this time series data to the science data processor, shown in pink there. And that consists of a set of processors, very high powered, as Sarah said at the opening plenary, but we need to feed those using DTNs and DMZ, as Joe mentioned, to processing centers around the world. Low is a little bit different in the sense that the antenna are connected via coax cables, rather like your high performance television dish, and they feed into RF over fiber. These are little boxes called smart boxes, which are scattered amongst the antenna, and then it's transmitted by modulating light at the RF frequency and sending it to the digitizer, which is located on the right of this mimic diagram. The thing to note that this is entirely analog. One has to be very careful about temperature variations, noise, etc., because with the dishes, you digitize at the focal point. Again, something very similar. You group them together in the central part of the telescope, transmits to Perth in this case. We only need 9 terabits. And then a similar thing happens. We go into a correlator, into the pulsar search and pulsar timing, and then into the science data processor, and finally into DTN to transmit the world. One interesting thing is that the correlator for low is based on a set of P4 switches. They do not switch on conventional network data. They switch on the metadata that describes the data in each packet. But that's, of course, a story all by itself. Summarizing, these are the data flows that we have within each of the telescopes. and the importance of processing and being very careful with the processes, what we end up with is something around about 130 petaflops is required in each telescope to process the data, which is basically transforming the time series into image maps, so you can see the observations. And the amount of data is of the order of 300 petabytes a year. Now, this is very convenient because that just about fits into a 100 gigabit link coming out of each telescope, but that will again be in continuous use. This is what's called the observatory data products, and they're pushed. The users will not be allowed to go and request data from here. They're pushed because essentially this is all pseudo real time. This is not the end of the story. In the data centers, one needs a lot of compute to turn this information into real science. And of course, they need to communicate amongst themselves. And we estimate that the advanced data products are somewhere near 3 times the size of the observatory data products. So the science, well, there's a large amount of science here. I've just put up a very nice graphic here, which I'm not really going to go into the details of each science, but to point out that very often the different types of science that you want to extract from the data will require different compute architectures. And that's why it's very important to make sure that the regional centers have the different capabilities and collaborate together. So what is an SRC? Well, in my terms, and I thank Rosie for stealing this slide, is that it is a global collaboration platform. What it acts as, you may think of it as like a bridge between the predefined workflows that I described in the science processor and the exploration that's required by the scientists. So it's going to provide collaborative tools, and the mimic diagrams on the right-hand side give you an example that the user might be working in notebooks, and that will then drive the compute systems of the SRCs to produce power spectra or catalogs of sources or images or details of the images called cutouts, and finally the plots for publication. The sort of power that's going to be required is something like 500 petaflops, and it's going to store at least 700 petabytes per year of observatory data products. Now that's assuming just one replication. That in turn will generate 3 times the volume in terms of advanced data products. And as I said before, users won't really have access to the data in the telescopes, so these are windows onto the telescope data. Well, we have to connect all this together. We have to move the data, as Joe was describing. Now, we worked with the SKA community to produce some sort of estimate of the cable systems, which I show you here, that are used by the academic network community, and we produced a document describing these and the approximate costs. Now, the costs are very much estimates. We have all the usual problems of being bound by commercial restrictions, but we were able to give guidelines. And of course, the costs vary quite a lot as we go to different locations and continents around the world. Looking in more detail at what will SKA require, well, we certainly need to get the data out of the telescopes, as I said earlier. That is represented by the red lines linking the telescopes to what I would say is more like the academic compute environment. The blue links are the ones that we already have and use, and which Joe also mentioned, are used by many different science communities, and they tend to use the shared academic network. But we pointed out that submarine cables could take a long time to recover, and we don't really want to stop taking science data. So a backup link shown in here in yellow will also be required when SKA is operational. We note, of course, that it's a continuous process of upgrading links. And when this diagram was made, the CAE1 link had just come into operation and was a very affordable path from Australia, or formed a very affordable path from Australia to Europe. In ballpark figures, it's around an OPEX cost of around 5 million a year. One way of connecting it is to form some global VRF overlays with peering. I think you've seen something very similar in WLCG, and this gives you a lot of flexibility. It gives the NRENs a lot of flexibility, but it also gives security and helps prevent a problem in one location propagating through the entire network. So this would allow the dedicated high volume paths or P4 connected set of links to be put in position as required once we know the data placement and the compute that the scientists require for SKA. As I said, data placement is very important. We have assumed that we will not be pumping out at 100 gig to each regional center, but that many different flows, and the flow here will carry a observatory data product, will be going simultaneously, as in the little mimic diagram at the top. We had a little exercise of what would it look like when we overlay this on the academic network. This, of course, will depend, the exact paths will depend on the network and the conditions of the various links at a given time. But left-hand side illustrates how the data coming from SKA low in Australia might go to the various countries around the world. And similarly for South Africa and SKA mid on the right. You can see that some of the links would be used to send data from one country like Australia to South Africa, or South Africa to Australia. We do not need to link the telescopes, but we do need to link the scientists in those countries. Now, what happens if a particular location requires a large amount or a full copy of the data? And because this study was done by a project called Aeneas, which was a European-funded Horizon 2020 project, we chose, well, what would happen if Europe wanted a full copy? Don't forget there are many countries in Europe. Well, the simplest way is to run another 100 gig link. Very easy, no problem. It's going to cost around 1.7 million, we estimated at the time. And this is 2020 prices. But it's also going to put an extra load on the SDP buffer systems and the transmission models, the DTNs at each telescope. I didn't go into those details, but that is not quite as simple as I probably indicated. The other thing is, well, how do you deal with backup paths if you want to do this? So there are quite a few uncertainties. Another model would be to send the data out to each SRC, and then each SRC send it on to another one. This does seem quite attractive. It does put an extra load on the general purpose shared academic network, as I've indicated with the red sorry, with the black circles on the right-hand side. And it may be that they will require dedicated links. On top of this, there's going to be the communication between the SRCs, which at the moment is still at the planning stage. So what is the timeline? Well, construction and contracts have already started last year, which is good. It's going to be a phased rollout, which makes a lot of sense. I've tried to indicate that here with what they call array assemblies, starting at 0.5, where you have like 6 low stations and 4 dishes, and then it will slowly build up. Now, in the first two, AA 0.5 and AA 1, the amount of data coming out will be fairly small. But we do need to be ready. The SRCs do need to be ready. The global networks do need to be ready for the data that will start to flow in 2025, 26, and build up to full telescope operations by 2028, which of course is a very similar timescale to the high luminosity WLCG. So what's happening now? Well, the SKA is organizing a set of prototyping phases and data challenges. So the data challenges has so far focused on how you might do the computation, how you would extract information from about the stars and the galaxies from the data that's given. Can we find the pulsars, for example? But we're now wanting to look at how do we set up and get operational the network of SRCs. And it's been split into several sections. Data management service, which actually doesn't sound very important, but it's one of the keys, because this looks after moving the data from the telescopes to the SRCs, between the SRCs. It could include, and probably will include, things like direct copy, third-party copy, but it's also got to work out where the data is, if you like, I called it the location index. Now, SKA is looking very seriously at building on the experience of other sciences, for example, looking at the probable use of Riccio and other similar techniques. Clearly, there will be restrictions on who can see what data. So a proper AAI has to be operational globally. That has also got a parallel in WLCG, but it needs to be adapted for the needs of the SKA community and their ways of doing things. Data science processing networks, how we actually get the data into the notebooks through the supercomputers, how do we get the analysis done properly to follow what they want to do, and data visualization. How do we look at a small postage stamp size in a very large data cube? To help all this, there's a project going on called the SKA NREN Forum, where we get the two sides together. We get the networking people and we get the scientists, and we exchange requirements and roadmaps. So we tell each other what we want and what might be possible, what would be easy and what would be difficult. And with that, thank you very much. Any questions?
All right, thanks, Richard, for an excellent talk. You really highlighted the issue of not only generating the data, but how to distribute the data to the people who needs it. And in this large-scale data generations, it is no easy challenge. Thank you very much, Richard. I'll next call upon Federica Lega, Associate Researcher from the National Institute for Nuclear Physics. And the title of talk is Distributed Computing Operation at the HL-LHC with Operational Intelligence. Federica?
Yeah, hi. Can you see my slides?
Not yet. Yes, I can see your slides now.
Okay, good. Thanks. So let me start. So first of all, thanks for inviting me to give this talk today about distributed computing operations at the HL-LHC. So let me first set the stage for this talk. So Joe already nicely introduced the LHC, so the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. As you guys know, it hosts 4 big experiments: ATLAS, CMS, ALICE, and LHCb. And it got worldwide famous for the discovery of the Higgs boson, who gave us the Nobel Prize for Physics in 2013. So to enable LHC science, we need a quite complex distributed computing infrastructure. And this is accomplished by the WLCG, which is the worldwide LHC computing grid. Just to give a couple of numbers, WLCG has about 1 million computer cores spread over more than 150 sites across the world, and it's in the exa scale for data. Basically, the 3 key areas of WLCG are distributed workload management, distributed data management, and the sites and facilities distributed across the world according to a hierarchical model with tier 0, tier 1, tier 2s, and tier 3s. Things are becoming even more complex in the near future with the high luminosity upgrade of the LHC, so the high Lumi LHC, where we expect an increase of the data taking rate by a factor 10. And several detector upgrades are planned for ATLAS and CMS. So this is going to kick off in 2027. And so to cope with the increased data taking rate, we expect to have 1 order of magnitude more resources than we have today. On the other hand, funding is limited, so we already know the person power for operating this infrastructure will not scale. So we have to cope with this. So just to give you an idea of how we operated WLCG for run 1 and run 2 of the LHC. So we have for each experiment several operational teams in charge of several aspects of the distributed computing infrastructure. So as I said, workload management, data management, sites, central services, and so on. And these operational teams basically look after the behavior of the various subsystems. And while there is already some degree of automation for some tasks, still a lot of the operation is manual and requires a human intervention, especially for what concerns problem fixing. The operational teams basically interact among each other using various means, such as emails, ticketing systems, chats, and so on. And just to give you an idea, ATLAS reports 1,000 gigas tickets per year, and for CMS we are in the range of 2,000 tickets per year. So clearly, creating and following up on all these tickets is a huge burden for people on shift and taking care of operation. So what we are trying to build is a system where as much as possible of operational tasks are automated. And basically, this is based on a common monitoring infrastructure and common data processing, and with the help of analytics and machine learning or AI techniques to process the data and provide shifters and operational teams with integrated views of issues that might occur to the infrastructure and suggestion of actions, or even possibly automatization of actions that the shifters need to take. In this vision, we can think of a reduction of manpower for operations, and also we can think of shared operations for some systems that might be common to experiments. For example, both Atlas and CMS use Rusio, and Atlas, CMS, and LHCb use FTS for data transfers. So in this context, a project called Operational Intelligence was born about a couple of years ago. This is a cross-experiment effort that is trying to streamline computing operation by following a few principles. So the idea is to pursue automation, and so minimize as much as possible operational tasks done by humans. By improving automation, we also expect to improve resource utilization, because basically problems and issues can be addressed in a shorter time period, and so downtimes can be reduced. To do that, we built basically a community of technical experts that work together on common issues. So the idea was to start by identifying common projects. As I said, there are some infrastructure that is software that is shared across the experiments, and we can build on top of that in order to create tools and share expertise and approaches to common problems, both across different experiments and across different teams within the same experiment. So bringing together people from operations, people that do monitoring, and software developers. So we built an infrastructure that is based on open source products. And we use Kubernetes for deploying and scaling services. Data injection, which are basically logs from the computing subsystems, are based on HTTP and ActiveMQ. And we use modern SQL databases for managing the monitoring metrics and the metadata. So the idea of these infrastructure is to have a clear separation of data, infrastructure itself, and visualization, and it is based on having standards for data, naming conventions, and validation of the data injected. On top of that, we can build automation based on annotating data, tagging, and from that we can create notification and alerts. And on these slides, you can basically see a summary of the technologies that we use. So basically, you can see many products from the Apache ecosystem, cloud native projects, and so on. So basically, we moved in the past couple of years from monitor applications that were custom to the experiment and to the subsystem to a common infrastructure where we are trying to to monitor as much as possible of our services, nodes, and infrastructure using common tools. So, for example, this is a schema of the CMS monitoring infrastructure, where we now have 5 Kubernetes clusters running several services that are used to monitor more than 200 nodes or services on a virtual machine, and more than 100 services on Kubernetes. And this results in about 500 dashboards. About 100 of them are used in a production environment, the creation of almost 200 rules. So you see that that also monitoring has become a quite complex data analytics platform. On top of that, we build a so-called intelligent alert system. This is basically a custom-made service that can parse GIGAS and LSB tickets. These are 2 common ticketing systems used in WLCG. The module can basically parse this ticket and group them and tag them according to the content of the ticket, and such content is used to annotate Grafana dashboards with the information from the ticket, which can be useful for shifters to basically have an idea of what is going on. If they see a problem, they can see if the problem has already been addressed, and so on. This tool can be deployed on any Prometheus Alert Manager stack, and it's completely experiment agnostic because it is just based on open source tools. And it features a pipeline which is expandable, so one can add whatever intelligence to the tool. And basically, you can see what it looks like here, where you have well, these are typical plots that are looked at by the shifters, and then you can see here the annotation. This is this blue thing, and then you have a description of the content of the annotation and links to the relevant tickets that that basically were used to create the annotation and the tags. So we learned a few lessons by building the system. First of all, annotations are indeed useful, but they may be overwhelming. So as we saw before, we do have a lot of tickets, and this really generates a lot of information. Therefore, one needs to reach a compromise between giving information to the shifter and summarizing this information so that that it can still be processed. To do that, we also developed the CLI tools that are able to manage the alerts and fetch data programmatically, so that that people can also rely on that apart from the plots that that one sees in Grafana. We also found a very useful interaction with the open source community to develop this tool. So I think this is important when that we use a common tool, so that the community is bigger than just our high energy physics one. But of course, we also are thinking beyond monitoring itself. So clearly, a functional monitoring showing a sufficient amount of information is covering almost all what the shifters need, and what the shifters can actually do and basically evolve with the monitoring tools we give them. However, investing in automation is also a very promising effort, and it can even a better means of cost saving rather than optimizing or sharing labor intensive operations done by human teams. So for automation, we are looking to several machine learning techniques, and we can see that that we can actually cover a lot of basically areas of interest. For example, we use classifications to predict which transfers may fail, which jobs may fail. We can use regression, for example, to predict the time it takes to complete tasks, data transfers, campaigns, and so on. We can use clusterization to group alerts and to do root cause analysis. Since most of the data we are processing is actually text coming from log files or from tickets, we use natural language processing. And then another very promising field of research is anomaly detection, because we can use it to detect problematic services, hosts, storages, and so on. So in the second part of this talk, I'm just going to flash a few projects we have been working on in the past couple of years. And for example, in the area of workload management, there is this project from Atlas, which is called Job Buster, which basically has the aim of classifying failed computing jobs and do a root cause analysis of why these jobs fail. So here you can see an example where basically failed jobs are shown and ranked according to the most common or most probable type of failure according to the feature of the jobs themselves. Another promising areas of research is concerning data management, and especially FTS, because as I said, FTS is used by Atlas, LHCb, and CMS. So tools developed can be used by many experiments. So we had several studies on FTS error messages. So the idea here is FTS is basically used for all transfers in WLCG. That's a lot of transfers. Some of these transfers will fail, with some, I mean, numbers of like 100,000 to 500,000 daily. So clearly, no human eye can look after all of these transfers. So we were looking for ways to basically group them. So to give operation teams an idea of what the most important things to look at are. And so we have several projects ongoing. This one is based on the analysis, on the text analysis of the error messages, and basically according to the content, clusters of messages are built and then exposed to the shifters, where one can look at basically time evolution of this cluster of errors and the sites that are most problematic. Another project, this is more about the sites themselves. This is a project developed by CERN IT to identify problematic nodes in the CERN cloud. So here they take several metrics from the nodes, and they use several machine learning techniques to basically do anomaly detection and identify which nodes are more likely to fail and need attention. And here you can see the results, where basically they combine several machine learning models to reach accuracy up to 90%. So this was just a quick overview of some of the work that we have done in the past 2 years. However, there is much more than that. I put here a link to a paper that just became public in January, which summarize all this work. In any case, I hope that in this short time I I could show you at least a glimpse of all the work and expertise and effort that has been done from various groups, from various experiments and teams. It has been a very interesting period of time where a lot of opportunities to basically create new collaborations among different teams and experiments were created, and this span out a lot of interesting projects. We do have a lot of challenges that we need to work on. For example, for what concerns machine learning, we are still basically learning how to do anomaly detection and natural language processing. This is not something that we usually do in our field. We have a lot of data to process, but most of this data is not annotated. So this is of course a problem for supervised models. And our communities still need to build trust in AI and machine learning assisted tools. However, as I showed, there is a lot of activities ongoing, and so this is very promising. We still have some time before HL-LHC, so we are confident that we can really build a robust system that can hopefully work with less effort from people, so that we can concentrate on the interesting physics that we can do with all the data that we take. So thanks a lot for listening, and if you have any question, let me know.
Okay, do we have any questions? Thank you for that excellent talk. It's partly, to me, a window into the future where you automate processes and turn things over to the robots, let's say, as opposed to having manually intensive. So anyway, very, very excellent. Questions?
Thanks, Federica. And also thanks for Joe for a comment. Yes, I think LHC was one of the first big global project which involves a large number of countries and very data intensive. I'll next like to call on Kenneth Ban, who is medical trained, and he's going to talk about building research platform for analyzing biomedical data in the age of genomics and beyond. Kenneth?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and also good morning throughout the whole world. Thanks for joining, and also thank the track organizers for the invitation to share a bit of some thoughts about how we can join the larger GRP community. So in contrast to some of the excellent work that's been presented in studies in astronomy and particle physics, the biomedical field actually is a bit less mature in terms of adoption of HPC. So I'll share some thoughts about what are the things that we can think about as we work towards building research platforms that are more purpose-built for analyzing biomedical data. Sorry. Okay, so why has this come about? I think the primary motivator is that for biomedical data, we live in an era where there's large, ever-increasing sets of data in genomics as well as other biological parameters. I think this is driven particularly by the introduction of next-generation sequencing. And now with all the omics technologies, we can have characterization of multiple parameters, from phenomics, from clinical parameters, down to the cellular level. As you can see here, we have genomics, transcriptomics, and down to the single molecule level. So as you can imagine, analysis of these large complex data sets is actually driving within the community the need for additional computational and storage resources. All right, so how in the biomedical field, how do we use it? So you can see here that we are not at the scale of square kilometer array, all right? But at least for data sets, because we do sequence a lot of people, so we can have large complex data sets, and these are all storage intensive. Then we do primary analysis, we do processing, the same thing. I'll try and reduce it to features and find patterns either by standard statistical analysis or by machine learning. And these hopefully will generate hypotheses that will give us insights to improve healthcare. So you can see the promise here is actually pretty good. This is one major project that exemplifies the kind of scale that we're talking about. So this is the UK Biobank project. This was introduced in 2018. Basically, it's a prospective cohort study of 500,000 UK individuals within that age range. And they basically follow these individuals over a long period of time. And they gather genotypic data, that means the genome, what constitutes a DNA, how the instructions, how we are made, as well as various phenotypic data. So it could be something like your blood pressure, your heart rate, or something like scans and things like that. So this is a very rich data set. Now in Singapore, I think we've embarked on something similar, okay, trying to catch up on the amazing kind of efforts in UK. So it's one of the phases here is actually the sequencing of 10,000 Singaporeans. So this is the initial phase that was published a couple of years ago, where it sequenced the major races in Singapore to get the genotypes that hopefully will inform us of the genetic diversity. And that could be linked to different diseases that may be prevalent in the region. Okay, so this is a national initiative effort now. We're going beyond phase 1. So in phase 2 now, we do have the PRECISE, which is a national office coordinating this effort. So in phase 2 now, we're going to expand it to 100,000 individuals, and in phase 3 up to 1 million Singaporeans. The idea here is, again, simple. We have the determinants, the genetic determinants of individuals, and then we do have the outcomes, okay? Healthy individuals, people who actually stay healthy, people who develop illnesses. So by doing all this large-scale analysis, hopefully we can inform how we can predict the health trajectories and hopefully avoid illnesses in the future. All right, so with that promise, obviously with this large complex data set, so we do need that kind of expertise that's traditionally used in disciplines such as particle physics, the LHC, as well as square kilometer array. We want to harness HPC resources and build platforms that could support biomedical research. Now, what are some of the pain points here that I would like to bring up? So usually, our scientists, biomedical scientists or clinicians are not trained computationally. So the initial one is the question or hypothesis. And then after that, hopefully, by some magic, you just put in the data, press a button, compute, and the insights come out. But we all know that it's not that simple. So the issue now is that because of this, impedance mismatch, where we're not computationally trained, so it's less accessible to biomedical scientists. The other thing also is because the technologies were developed slowly over time, so there's loose coupling between the different domains. For example, imaging, the way we sequence patients, and then, of course, going back to the old-fashioned taking your blood pressure and your heart rate like this. So this has resulted in heterogeneous data sets and also heterogeneous computational pipelines, all right? And the other thing also that may be a bit more unique for biomedical research is that there's an issue of data privacy and confidentiality that I'll talk about shortly. So if we step back a bit and see what would serve the needs of the biomedical research community. So firstly, we can look at the data aspect. Obviously, I mentioned before it's heterogeneous. And because of that, we probably need to try to add more metadata. So this would describe the various aspects of data so we can make use of it. Because some of the data sets that I'll talk about actually exist in different versions, so versioning is something very important. And because they come from multiple domains, and let's say it's obtained from the same individual, there needs to be identified that links them all together in a secure manner. In terms of compute, I think it's not much different from the other domains. There's a need for exploratory analysis, so increasingly people in biomedical research love to use notebooks for exploratory analysis. And for some HPC platforms, this is not the traditional way of doing things. And for batch-based things, because a lot of the pipelines are actually, again, heterogeneous, there's a problem with reproducibility. Of course, a lot of the things, because most people are not computationally as mature as the other fields, where services are available. For example, BLAST, the traditional one by NIH, where you just put in something is pre-computed in the background, and the results are delivered. This one actually accelerates our research and discovery. All right, so obviously all this needs to be integrated. Now, where can we get guidance from? So we stand on the shoulders of giants, all right? So so for example, looking at data, we adopt the FAIR framework from the European community. So Alexa here. So for example, F stands for findable. So the data will make sure that it can be findable. There is a persistent ID. There's rich metadata. For A, it's accessible. So there should be standardized protocols so that data can be exchanged. There's open implementation and also the same issues about authentication, who gets access to it. For I, it would be interoperable. So we should, the data should be in a formal shared language. And if there's linkage, you should reference the data in a way that you can track. And of course, R is reusability. Oops. Okay, so reusability in which there's rich description, there's proper licensing, and then we know where the sources come from. Okay, so let's have a look at the other aspects of what are the things that may be a bit unusual about biomedical data. So a lot of data which is also shared in common with the other data sets, the difference between process and raw data. So a lot of the raw data actually is accessed at different frequencies. And for some of us who actually try to build systems like that, we want to think about hierarchical storage management, particularly policy-based one. The other thing also is that a lot of the workflows actually generate a lot of small intermediate files, and some of the traditional file systems do not handle it very well. So tuning needs to be, be part of the process. Standardized metadata, because a lot of the data formats are actually not self-describing, so there needs to be some metadata. And that's why a lot of biomedical researchers have gravitated towards object storage. And versioning, as I mentioned before, so this is an example of which human reference genomes are used in analysis where comparison is made. And different versions will come out at different times as the type of improvements of analysis manifests itself over time. All right, now something that's peculiar to biomedical data, particularly where there's clinical or patient data, is the issue of privacy. I think the reason is that a lot of data sources, particularly, for example, clinical records, may have personal identifiers or may actually have indirect identifiers, for example, address, your phone numbers and things like that, or age, whether you have a rare disease or not. So this one requires some work in which we need to undergo a process of de-identification. So this is a large topic by itself, and this one actually makes a problem for interoperability. So it needs to be de-identified, and then you have a standard pseudo ID in which the data can be linked. Of course, because of the data privacy issues, something that I will not talk about because it's a whole different talk. Also, we all need to comply to different regulations. Okay, so briefly speaking, for compute, we need to address the need for interactive computing. So traditionally, when biomedical researchers use an HPC system, they are confronted with the standard HPC workflow, and this one sometimes is not well suited for their needs. So to address that, we also have capacity for provisioning interactive notebooks, because this one allows them to interactively explore the data and also document it in a proper way. How about reproducibility? So this is a big issue in biomedical research. So a lot of the analysis steps actually involve multiple steps. This is something like Unix philosophy. We just join many small tools together. So it's usually a branching acyclic graph like this. I think the issue is that there are many different tools and each one has a different version. The problem is that depending on which version you use, you may end up with a different result. And the pipeline actually may not be portable because of the different dependencies. So if that, actually a lot of biomedical researchers have gravitated towards more reproducible workflows. So for HPC platforms, for example, containers now have been adopted, particularly things like Singularity. They also have registries for biological kind of applications. So this like biocontainer registry, a very rich community there. Now, workflow orchestration, There are two major ones in contention. For example, one is Nextflow, the other one is the Common Workflow Language. These are all declarative. We just tell them what you want, and then they'll just string all the operations together and then dispatch them to the HPC system. Obviously, these workflows, when they're good recipes, they can be put in a nice registry and all versioned. Okay, so again, for biomedical researchers, if we can get away from actually coding the thing and just getting the insight that you want, that's what we want. So we have to focus also on the need for emerging services. So you may have heard of AlphaFold, where use of AI by DeepMind actually successfully predicted a lot of protein structures. So they pre-computed all the protein structures that are available. However, we can foresee a need where there may be some services, this is just one example, where we can expose an API where you can put in a sequence that you just discovered, maybe it's a new organism, and then we can do the computational pipeline in the background, and then after that deliver results and cache it. All right, so obviously we learning from GÉANT, so I just highlighted a few here. Some of them are actually more general, for example, Elixir, Cyvers. Some are more domain specific, for example, cancer or genomics like this. So what we hope as we think within Singapore, how we can build a shared platform for biomedical research and also look to the future in which we can participate in a larger international community, what would it look like? So towards the integrated web, so obviously biomedical research work, same with everything else, there's always data, and that's a computational workflow that comes together. Traditionally, it is not done in a documented manner, so what we hope by building a platform that's easy to use is firstly, some data where it actually contains some potentially identified data. It should be run through a de-identification or anonymization engine, and the data should be annotated with the appropriate metadata. And for workflows, as I mentioned before, containers now in HPC have been widely used, so this one is something that we can actually package all the different dependencies and version them. But beyond that, just having the separate registries for the data and the workflows is actually documentation. So the hope is, at least for our biomedical research community, it could be a notebook, it could be a wiki also to document that how the data was actually processed. It will be part of a publication in which there would be a documented workflows that anybody can actually reproduce it and build upon this to further their own research. Now, underlying layer, everything is about repository versioning with the proper tiered access. And of course, what was earlier mentioned by Prof. Joe Mambretti, it's all software-defined, hopefully a software-defined compute as well as software-defined networking. And I mentioned before that at least for biomedical researchers, we love convenience, all right? So not forgetting the part where there are services that we can actually wrap it up in an API, that it can be run in the background. That would be something helpful for the community. Now, because it's GRP, I'm going to talk about, I'm just talking about a platform that maybe we can build for something, within a region or, within national efforts like this. But what about being in a larger part of the collaborative community? So this is abundantly clear, at least for biomedical research. Collaborative work on shared biomedical data will improve explanatory and predictive power. So for example, you sequence genotypes from a region and you combine it with the data from another region, the power for prediction and explanatory variables will dramatically increase. But we have to contend with two major issues. One is data movement, the other one data privacy and sovereignty. So data movement, as you can see before, I think we can build upon all the experiences by the GRP. You can look at all the data that's moved around the world through the 4 square kilometer array. This, I'm just sharing some early experiments some years ago that we play around with some transport technologies. This was experimenting in global long-range InfiniBand, about 30,000 kilometers. So we shuttle data across some partners around the world. So there was an experimental geo distributed HPC cloud cluster using this global InfiniBand network. And surprisingly, it worked quite well. You can see through standard TCP/IP, you actually took half a day to transfer about terabyte of data, but using this transport technology, we actually can reduce it. So I think for us, and I'm sure we can learn from all the experts here, how we can leverage how data movement can be done efficiently. But the other thing, the last point I bring about is actually, even if you move data for biomedical, particularly those that involve individuals that potentially could be re-identified, this becomes the issue of data privacy and sovereignty. So how can you do it? So this one is another huge topic, but I'll just share some of the strategies that people have been thinking about. There's no one clear winner yet. So for example, you can share encrypted data. All right, so our cloud providers have already offered confidential computing, in which we have trusted enclaves, where it's decrypted within the chip and then processed like this. The other one that people want is actually just doing the analysis on encrypted data via homomorphic encryption, but this one is still early days ahead. The other way is sharing non-identifiable data. So there's another whole field about differential privacy, in which you add noise to the data so that when it's shared, the aggregate outcome is still reliable. However, there's enough noise in the data that you cannot re-identify the individual. Sharing aggregate data is not an issue. In fact, a lot of the publicly available data sets where there's aggregates about population level thing is readily shared. So this one, to aggregate, you can use well-known statistical methods and meta-analysis to actually just combine our power and see whether we can link it to an outcome. And for AI, there's a whole field of federated learning where you don't share the data, but you share the weights of the model, and then you just train it together. So these are some thoughts as, for us, at least in Singapore, we've been thinking about partnering with people who are interested to build something at least to address some of the issues that I've talked about. With that, I thank you very much, and please feel free to contact me for anything.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. Very interesting talk, and right into the medical field, which is ever growing, bigger and bigger. Our next call on Wei Yang and Yusra El-Sayed, and the topic is computing infrastructure to support Rubin's science mission. Wei Yang?
Yeah, can you hear me? Let me try to share my screen.
Yes, I can hear you now. Yep.
Oh, the screen is already. Do I need to share my screen?
Yeah, we see you and your presentation.
Let me see. I suppose since there is Israel built some. Oh, okay, good. So thank you very much for inviting us and giving Ruben an opportunity to talk about our computing infrastructure in order to support Rubin's science mission. Israel was going to give an introduction on Rubin science, and I will be talking about computing infrastructure, but I don't see that Israel is on the line because she is located at the US East Coast. So maybe she's still sleeping. So with that, maybe we can go to the next slide and play the pre-recorded video that Israel has.
Hi, I'm Yusra El-Sayed, astronomer and project manager for the Science Pipelines team at Rubin Observatory's data production. I am pre-recording this video from my home office in Princeton, just in case I wasn't still awake during this session. Before we go into details about the computing infrastructure, I wanted to introduce how the science goals of Rubin Observatory naturally give rise to certain data management challenges. To physicists, Rubin is the next big cosmology experiment, which will measure dark energy parameters using weak gravitational lensing or distances to type 1a supernovae. To me, Rubin Observatory is the first all-sky time domain survey. Every telescope throughout history has accomplished something new, or else it wouldn't exist. Our claim to fame is our enormous field of view, which will be able to image the night sky in just a few days, which means you can do it over and over and over and build up a movie of the sky over the course of 10 years. We'll finally be watching how everything in the sky appears, moves, changes. This will enable the discovery of supernovae, killer asteroids, and uncover the structure of the Milky Way. And my favorite use case is the discovery of unknown unknowns, those rare events that you only catch when you're always filming. So how are we going to produce this 10-year movie of the southern sky? By making everything bigger. So we don't necessarily have the biggest mirror at an 8-meter diameter, but we do have the biggest field of view for its given depth and the biggest camera. The camera is the size of a small car, weighs 3 tons, and the front lens is almost as tall as I am. The sensor plane is made up of 189 individual CCDs. Each CCD is 4,000 by 4,000 pixels. The entire focal plane or field of view is 40 times the size of the full moon. And every image is 3.2 gigapixels or 1,500 HD TVs. We're going to take a picture with this camera once every 30 seconds and process it through our image processing software, which will produce both calibrated images and catalogs for astronomers throughout the world to use.
So I'm not sure, these slides should have another video to talk about it. It doesn't seem to be there, but anyway, I can talk about this. So, okay, it's here.
And we'll distribute these data products in 2 ways, fast and slow. Fast are our prompt data products via a nightly alert stream. This supports science that requires rapid follow-up. Alerts will be distributed to the community brokers within 60 seconds of image readout with everything that has changed, appeared, or moved in that image. Slow are via our annual data release productions. Every data release every year, we produce calibrated images and catalogs combined from all the raw images taken by the survey to date. So this means that by data release 11, 10 years in, the data products are going to be quite large. We expect on order hundreds of petabytes of pixels and tens of petabytes of catalogs. Now back to Wei on how we will manage data of this volume and velocity.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about how are we going to have the computing infrastructure to support this mission. So start from the data, we're going to get 20 terabytes of raw data from the LSST camera every night. And we are going to produce, roughly speaking, 35 petabytes of data per year for the next 10 years, for 10 years. Now, this doesn't sound a lot, but the next number is a lot. 1.5 billion files per year, which is, this number is the total number that if you're familiar with LHC, the Atlas round 1 and round 2 combined is 1.5 billion. So we need to process all this data, old data every year using the new software release. And in the end, by the 11th years, we're going to have 20 petabytes of catalog database. And the amount of, this is about data, the amount of computing power is relatively moderate. It's 150 teraflop the first year. At the 11th years, we're going to need, roughly speaking, 1,000 teraflops. So this is a more manageable thing. So in terms of time scale about this, the first camera is a commissioned camera, which has a much lower resolution, but allowed us to tune every system. This camera will be online and data will start arriving at early of next year. And LSST camera, the real camera data, which is still, the camera is still at SLAC, is going to arrive in 2024 or 2025. So during this period from now to 2024, we are building our computing infrastructures. So in terms of how we processing them, there are three steps based on the timelines. The first one is when the data arrive from the camera to Slack, and there is some kind of prompt processing. That's what Israel mentioned about 6 seconds and tens of billions of alerts every night. This is another areas of focus that I'm going to talk about. What I'm going to talk about is more about offline computing, the slow processing, the data release processing, which we use the LSST software for more detailed processing. And this processing will be at multiple facilities across the US and Europe. And once this data is processed, we will send them to a number of data access centers so that our scientists, astrophysicists will be able to analyze the data. So this is one shows the data flow. So the camera is in Chile, some kind of mountaintop and in Chile, and the camera, once they take the data, they were shipped to Slack, which is the location of USDF for the first step, which is the prompt processing. And then once the data is released from prompt processing, this is where the data release processing starts. So the data release processing will actually be processed in 3 facilities. One is in USDF, which is in Slack National Lab. The other is in France in CCI in 2P3, and there is also a UK data facility that will process the data. So each of these data facility has their own share, roughly speaking, 25, 50, and 25% of the DRP. In addition, US and French data facility each will host a full copy of the raw data and probably process the data. And US data facility will host almost all the services. There is a few services that will be hosted by the French data facility. Once we process them, and then the data will be made available to, roughly speaking, 15 data access centers around the world. Most of the data centers scientists are mostly accessing the catalog data rather than image data. But in some cases, they do need to access the actual calibrated image, which in that case, they will actually have to stream data from the data facility. And we also provide a science platform, a Rubin science platform, so sort of software environment for them to access the data. So in terms of computing infrastructure, so as I said, we have 3 data facilities in the US, in France, and in the UK. And at each data facility, there are 2 enclaves. One is offline production, the other is for archive. So you can think of this, the first one as basically the computing farm. The second one, the archive enclave, is sort of a storage. And so each facility will have this kind of hardware. So we need a software layer to orchestrate all these. There are 2 things, main things. One is the workflow management system. The other is the distributed data management system. With these 2 systems, we move data around, we dispatch data to all these 3 places for processing. And so there will be, in terms of hardware, there will be storage, batch involved. In terms of software, there will be data management system, workflow management system. And on top of that, there is also authorization and authentication and authorization system involved. So for those of you who are familiar with LHC, you'll see that this terminology that I use are quite familiar. So in fact, that Rubin is adopting a number of technologies from the LHC experiment, but on the other hand, Rubin has its own set of challenges. When we adopt this technology, we also need to deal with those challenges. So in terms of computing storage, those infrastructures at each of the data facilities for computing, we mostly will use high throughput computing. There is not much need for fast interconnections. So SLUM and HT-Condo are our standard batch systems, and the batch nodes normally have a local scratch disk and Ethernet and outbound TCP connections, but probably not much about InfiniBands, this type of network connections. So we sort of using widely used in LHC mode, the copy to scratch, so that we pull the data from the storage in a local scratch, process them, and push the output data back to the storage. In terms of storage, Ruben has a preference of object store because of the scalabilities, and because Ruben has 1.5 billion files per year. POSIX is still acceptable, and actually we do have a smaller POSIX environment, especially in the USDF, to support developers. The potential technology that we are looking at for object store S3-based object store, or it's either X2D-based storage or Dcache-based storage. We haven't made a decision in the USDF, and I think in French DF and UK DF, they have some better ideas, but they are also not making final decisions. There is a lot of service that we need to run, like for the workflow management systems and for the data management system, and there are many other things. So what we provide in the US is a platform, a Kubernetes cluster for the platform to host all these services, and also to host the Ruben's science platform if we are going to host that. And in terms of networking, since most of the data will come from the USDF to the UK DF and French DF, USDF is actually looking at upgrading our existing 200 megabit per second wide area network to 400 megabit. And there is also possibilities to upgrade to even higher. And our other data facilities are also looking at upgrading their network bandwidth to something much higher. So we will likely heavily utilize the transatlantic network. So we are closely working with ESNet for the US part. We are working with them. And we're also planning to deploy a large, several DTNs. Some of them will be dedicated for data transfer between the data facilities. Some of them will be to help users streaming their data if they want to access the catalog image. So in terms of the software layer to orchestrate all these things, this is again, somebody familiar from LHC is familiar with. So we have a workflow management system based on using the Panda, and there is a distributed management system using the Rusio ecosystem. And at each data facility, US, UK, and France, we also have elements like Rusio storage elements, which is essentially storage, hard drive or tape, and then you will have the data transfer nodes. And we also have grid CEs. This is the sort of interface between Panda and our batch systems. And then that will take the job from Panda and submit to our batch systems. The job, when they run, they will access CBMFS for software. And there is also a component called Butler. This is unique for Ruben. I will talk about that later. So I won't go into the detail of all this workload and workflow management system, but to say that, again, we're adapting mature technology whenever we can. So Panda is going to be our workload management systems. As one of the plots shows, that Panda has proved to be able to handle large amount of parallel jobs. This particular plot shows 800K concurrent jobs. So we will use IDDS for workflow management system. IDDS is also developed by the LHC, but it's actually a relatively new component, and it will actually probably see its real complex use case in Ruben, because Ruben's direct A-circle graphic, the workflow is both wide and deep and complicated, and there are lots of dependencies here. So this is one area that Ruben will probably test how IDDS will work. And for the grid CEs, we're going to adapt ArcCE, and we're also going to use CDMFS, and French DF will host the CDMFS service. On the data management side, again, whenever we adapt, whenever there is a good thing, we'll try to adapt. The Rusio ecosystem, this is actually composed of several components as well. So the Rusio itself is sort of a data catalog and a data movement manager. FTS is the batch system for data transfer, and Extrude in this case is the data transfer agent. So nothing nothing special here, except that given how many files Rubin has, this is going to be a big challenge, especially for Rusio, the backend database, how big it is, how to index, how to manage them. That's going to be a big challenge for us. And for FTS, the challenge will be how to efficiently transfer so many data files. And for XRoot, I think the challenge, which we almost already solved, is how to interface XRoot to the object store. And that's sort of, we are on track for that. So a unique component in Rubin is Butler. This is the original data management system. Now Butler is sort of used to host the metadata. So Rusio system will know where is the data file, but Rusio does not know what is that file for. It is Butler who knows what is this data for. So user will access Butler to know what data they need to access. Butler is also a software layer. It's not just the backend database, but it's also a software layer to provide users to access the data. So naturally, there is a need to integrate Rusio and Butler together to talk so that they don't have different informations that end up with inconsistent. So a few highlights of Rubin's support for scientists. Once we have this data processed, the data will be made available at a number of data access centers around the world. So Rubin sort of most of them will be in the cloud, but a few of them will be in the DFs. But that will be a challenge, especially locating such a thing in the US National Lab. We do provide a standard software platform called Rubin Science Platform, which is a software environment that will deploy standard deployment at each data access centers. It will heavily utilize Kubernetes at each location. And we expect a large fraction of the analysis will be using Jupyters. And a few of them will actually use batch, especially those that needs to access the backend catalog image. So there is a possibility that the data needs to be streamed from data facilities to data access center. And when that happens, probably the bandwidth requirement is pretty high for short bursts. One of the unique things in Rubin is something called QServe. It's a distributed share nothing database for Rubin catalogs. So this is for users to access the catalog, to search the catalog. So by the 11th years, the database will likely be in tens of petabyte range, and it will have 60 trillion rows and about 47 billion objects. So, and this is all technology that has been built, and it's leveraged the existing technology like MariaDB, MySQL proxy, XRoot, Google stuff, and other things. So, in summary, the Rubin computing model and infrastructure, the idea that we have is we will look at what the existing technologies available to us. One of these is from the LHC community, and we adopt a number of good technologies from them, but we also have to develop our own. This is very obvious in the GRP side, the data release processing. We adopt a number of technologies like Panda ecosystem, Rusio ecosystem, the grid computing model, the CBMFS, but we also have to address some of the unique things. The unique things for us is the complex depth, the large number of small files, how to handle that, the Rusio and object store integration and Rusio Butler integration. On the RSP side, Rubin Science Platform, one of the interesting things that I believe that the other community, there's some HEP community has been talking about, but not quite doing that. Rubin is driving is to use the cloud for data analysis. And then in the end, the last thing is the QServe. It's a unique database to the extreme. So we are going to see how interesting, how well it works. Thank you.
Right. It was very, very useful that you share about the Rubin Service Platform. Thank you very, very much. Our next call upon Dr. Ivana Golub, Senior Researcher from Poznan Supercomputing and Networking Center. And she will talk about the GN5 Network Technology and Services development in the GÉANT project. Ivana?
Hello, good morning and good afternoon. My name is Ivana Golub, and I work for Poznan Supercomputing Network as the co-leader of the Network Technologies and Services Development Work Package in the GÉANT project. To set the scene, I'll provide some information about the GÉANT project and then focus on our work in network development. The GÉANT vision is to provide equal access to infrastructures and resources for scientists across Europe. The project is run as a part of the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Program. We have around 500 contributors from 40 partners, mostly European research and education institutions, working for over 50 million users. The project is scheduled for 4 years and finishes at the end of this year. These slides just provides an overview of the size and the complexity of the GÉANT project, where network technologies and services development is one of the sub-projects. It is led by Tim Chown from GISC and myself, and it has a budget of over 6.2 million euros. We have a team of over 80 members from 33 research and education organizations coming from 23 countries. In our project, we look at network technologies, network services, and in monitoring and management of these network services and technologies. In the following slides, we'll see more about each of these topics, and even more than that is provided on our wiki page, whose link you can see on this slide. For each of the topics, there are some tags at the right-hand side of each box, which indicates but do not limit possibilities for your engagement. We indicate when there is some software that is ready to be deployed, where we can collaborate, exchange information and knowledge, or where you might contribute. So please let us know if any of these is of your interest. So in the network technology evolution task, we are looking at how to support networks and applications that require low latency. As a part of this work, we have developed a time map tool. The link to this is provided on the slide, which provides T-WAMP measurements of jitter and delay in the GÉANT backbone per segment and between core network routers. As the tag suggests, time map is available to be deployed in other environments, and we will welcome your feedback, of course. The second area of work is related to implementing time and frequency services in unrun optical networks. Several European unruns have implemented time and frequency services, and differences in their implementation include frequency bands that are chosen equipment, and also the use cases that they have in mind. It was summarized in a white paper and info shares, and the team is now offering also consultancy in deploying time and frequency services in optical networks in our community. We are also looking at how white box solutions can be used for unrun use cases. Several use cases were explored, such as a CPE, for Internet Exchange Point in data centers, and it is summarized in a set of white papers and info shares. All of them are available through our NetDev wiki. This work is now completed. The one remaining part is device performance evaluation and testing. We are also looking at how data plane programming can help in providing better network monitoring and management. For in-band network telemetry, source, transit, and sync nodes are implemented in P4 for several data planes with ongoing tests in a multi-domain testbed spanning 4 countries over a production network. Preliminary results are published in a white paper, and another document about clock synchronization aspects is in progress. The interest in quantum technologies is growing in Europe. Our team is currently evaluating simulators and testbed options, preparing a proof of concept with Toshiba in the GÉANT network, and starting the Quantum E-Academy to raise the knowledge in the community. In addition, we organize monthly discussion forums, which are open for everyone. And if you are interested, you can join the mailing list for more information. In this project, our team has created an open source routing operating system, which we call RARE, Router for Academia, Research and Education. It includes several control and data planes like BMV2, Tofino, FPGA, DPDK, and more details on which features are supported for which of these platforms is available on the wiki. The number of use cases where RARE is implemented is growing, such as for private peering in Renater in France, the Polka project in Brazil, multicast BRI-AMT, etc. RARE is also implemented in the GÉANT P4 lab, which started with just 4 switches in the GÉANT network, including now 15 nodes worldwide. One of our production services is the Service Provider Architecture Platform, which includes all necessary components to enable automatic provisioning, monitoring, management, and termination of connectivity services. It is used for GÉANT Connectivity Service, GCS. It is also a TM Forum compliant, and its architecture mapped to the reference TM Forum Open Digital Architecture is available on our wiki pages. In this project, our focus is also on orchestration, automation, and virtualization, or OAV, in order to raise its implementation in our community. We have created an OAV terminology document, which is also accepted by the GNAG Automation Working Group. We have established the Network Automation E-Academy with over 20 training modules available for immediate use and several more in process now to be published. We are also mapping ANDREN OSS BSS architectures to the TM Forum Open Digital Architecture Reference Model, and we are collecting information about ANDREN OAV use cases on the community portal. In the network monitoring and management area, we are providing several production services. Within the global partnership with ESNet, Indiana University, Internet2, RNP, and University of Michigan, we are developing and supporting Persona Worldwide, the well-established toolkit for active network performance monitoring. Our team is contributing in software development and user support, providing also consultancy and guidance to the GÉANT community. Third European Persona User Workshop is planned as a 2-day event for May, the first day focusing on user stories and the second day providing updates from the development team. Here you can see the link to these pages, but it is also referenced in one of the further slides. We have also implemented Persona in a mesh of small nodes all over Europe, performing measurements in several points in Europe and intercontinentally, and it is done in our performance measurement platform, or PMP. Wi-Fi Mon is a crowdsourced and/or RPI-based Wi-Fi performance monitoring solution, suitable also for edge row monitoring and available for installation and use as an open source software. Network Management as a Service, or NMAS, is another production service which provides a portfolio of applications run via a secure virtual platform, suitable for institutions that want to focus on network management and not on operating the NMS platform itself. Another tool that we are preparing to transition into production service is Argus, an aggregating alarm console that can present alarming messages from different sources in one place. This is particularly useful for campus network management as a service situations where one organization should manage several networks with their independent monitoring systems. Argus and other topics related to campus network management as a service will be presented at the CNAS workshop on May 4th. While recognizing that daily operations require stable and sometimes traditional implementation, we were looking ahead into the more detailed and precise network telemetry through data plane programming, P4-based flow monitoring, and requirements of high-speed networks monitoring and management. There are 2 upcoming workshops on the topics that we would welcome you to attend. It is the second performance management workshop next week on March the 8th, and second telemetry and data workshop on April the 6th. As we mentioned that this project ends this year, a logical question is what happens after that? So the good news is that it is continuing in the next project, which is called GÉANT 5.1, and the preparations for this project are already ongoing. So we plan to continue with all the production services and most of the work, and we will also have some new topics such as network device evaluation, tech lab, and incubator with the focus groups, which will allow us agility in selecting work areas. So in concluding this presentation, I would like to draw your attention to the forthcoming events that we are organizing or co-organizing. And for all of them, you can see the registration page and more information at the events.geant.org site. So with the limited time, we will not able to go into details about all the topics, and we just wanted to raise the awareness about the ongoing work. So for more information about any of these topics, please visit this wiki page, and of course, contact us either for more information or if you would like to join any of our work topics. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will, of course, welcome any comments or questions.
Thank you, Ivana, for sharing with us the activities that are going on in Europe GÉANT, led by GÉANT. Thank you very much. We will take a 10 minutes break, and we'll come back about 3:40 Singapore time. So just a 10 minutes break, and we'll come back. And we'll have, we'll start off with talk by Tom and a number of other speakers. So see you back in 10 minutes. Thank you.